What exactly does a woman from across the world do that 11 specialists for therapists and a father who loves his son completely could not? She didn't have a degree in it. She didn't have a method. She didn't even know the boy existed until she found him under a kitchen table at 6 in the morning with a spoon pressed against his cheek. Whatever she did, it worked. And it terrified the most powerful man in the country in a way that nothing else ever had. The world has been waiting for a love story like this one. The kind that doesn't ask for permission and doesn't care about power. Subscribe now, because this story will reach straight into your chest and rearrange something. Bring her to me now. The Korean Mafia boss ordered his guard. The guard, a tall, stiff man named Officer Woo, stared at his boss for exactly 1 second longer than was safe. Then he turned and walked down the hallway of the estate without another word. His boss, Seo Jae-in, did not move from the window. He stood there with his hands clasped behind his back, watching the garden below. His jaw was set. His eyes, dark, calculating, the kind that had made grown men apologize for things they hadn't even done yet, were locked on the scene that had just stopped him mid-sentence during a phone call he'd been having with one of the most dangerous men in the country. He had simply said, "I'll call you back," and ended it. Because down in the garden his son, 8-year-old Seo Geo, who hadn't spoken a full sentence in 4 months, who screamed when strangers touched him, who hadn't laughed since before his mother left, was dancing. Not the stiff, rehearsed kind of movement the therapists tried to get from him. Not the uncomfortable swaying they sometimes tricked him into. Geo was actually dancing. Arms out, head tilted back, eyes closed. And beside him, matching every movement like she had known his rhythm her whole life, was the new cook. The one Jae-in had barely glanced at when the housekeeper, Mrs. Song, brought her in 3 weeks ago. The one he had approved with a single nod because her references were clean and the last cook had quit after Geo threw a bowl of rice across the kitchen. The one whose name he now realized he didn't actually know. Her name was Adiz Collins, though everyone who knew her well enough called her Addie, and people who didn't know her at all called her the African girl like it was a job title. She was 26 years old, had grown up in a flat above a bakery with 4 brothers and a mother who cooked like she was trying to feed the whole street even when money was thin. She had learned to make jollof rice before she could ride a bicycle. She had learned that food wasn't just food, it was a conversation. A comfort. A way of saying I see you without having to use words. She had come to Korea because of a scholarship that fell through and a cooking apprenticeship that didn't. She had stayed because the plane ticket home cost more than she had, and because something about this country, the early mornings, the mountains visible on clear days, the way old women at markets pressed extra vegetables into her bag when they thought she looked hungry, felt like it was asking her to be patient. The Seo estate job came through an agency. The pay was good. The requirements were strict. She was not to disturb the master of the house. She was not to speak to guests. She was not, under any circumstances, to enter the West Wing. Nobody mentioned anything about the boy. On her first day, she had found Geo sitting under the kitchen table at 6 in the morning, rocking back and forth with a spoon pressed against his cheek. Mrs. Song, who had been with the household for 11 years, looked at Addie with tired eyes and said, "Leave him. He'll move when he's ready." Addie had left him. But she'd also placed a small bowl of warm egusi soup, something she'd had the ingredients for by chance, on the floor beside him. Not close enough to startle him. Just close enough. By the time she looked up from the cutting board 20 minutes later, the bowl was empty. She didn't say anything about it to Mrs. Song. Over the following 2 weeks, a pattern formed that Addie never planned and Geo never acknowledged, but both of them silently agreed to. She cooked. He appeared. Not always in the kitchen. Sometimes he appeared in the hallway outside it, sitting against the wall with his knees pulled up. Sometimes he appeared in the small pantry room, where she stored dry goods, sitting on a low shelf like he was part of the inventory. Twice, he appeared in the garden while she was collecting herbs, and he stood 3 feet away from her and watched her hands. She never called attention to his presence. She talked, though. Not at him, exactly. More like around him, the way her mother used to talk to plants. Just words in the air. Stories about her brothers. Descriptions of what she was cooking. Observations about the weather. The basil is confused today, she told the garden one afternoon, turning a leaf over in her fingers. It's trying to grow in the wrong direction. I do that sometimes too. Try to grow the wrong way. Usually I figure it out eventually. Gio, standing 3 feet to her left, had tilted his head exactly the way a person tilts their head when they're listening but don't want you to know it. She kept talking. The dancing happened on a Thursday. Addie had woken up that morning with a song from her childhood stuck so deep in her head it was practically structural, an old song her mother used to hum while braiding her hair, something without proper words, just a rhythm that meant you're safe, you're home. Everything is going to be fine. She hummed it while she cooked. She hummed it while she moved around the kitchen. By the time she went out to the garden to get rosemary, the song had taken over her feet as well, and without really deciding to, she was moving. Not dramatically, not a performance, just the small, genuine movement of someone who has forgotten for a moment that they're being watched. She heard a sound behind her. She turned. Gio was standing at the garden entrance, and this was the part that made her throat do something complicated. He was attempting to copy her. Badly. Wonderfully. His small arms were out, and his coordination was off, and his face had the most concentrated, serious expression she had ever seen on a child attempting something joyful. She did not stop. She did not make a big deal of it. She simply adjusted her rhythm so he could follow it more easily, and she kept humming, and she extended one hand, palm up, not grabbing, not demanding, just offering. He took it. And for the next 4 minutes, she counted later because she wanted to remember, Gio, who screamed when strangers touched him, held the hand of the cook from across the world, and danced in the garden of his father's estate. Upstairs, Jae-in had seen all of it. He stood at that window and watched, and something happened in his chest that he didn't have a name for because the last time he'd felt anything close to it, he had been a completely different person in a completely different life, and he had sworn very thoroughly with considerable reason that he would never be that person again. His phone rang. He ignored it. His guard, Officer Wu, appeared at the door of the study. You wanted to see the cook, sir? Jae-in turned from the window. Bring her to me. Now. Addie had been washing the rosemary when Mrs. Song found her. The older woman's face was arranged in the specific expression it took on when she needed to say something unpleasant and was trying to do it with dignity. Addie had learned to read this expression well. The master wants to see you, Mrs. Song said. Addie turned off the tap. Did I do something wrong? I don't know. Mrs. Song's voice was careful. He doesn't explain himself. Addie dried her hands, untied her apron. She was not afraid, or she told herself she wasn't. She walked through the estate behind Officer Wu, past the first sitting room with its quiet, expensive furniture, past the second hallway where the light came in at an angle in the late afternoon, to the study on the 3rd floor. The door opened. Jae-in was standing with his back to her, facing the window. He was tall, taller than she'd expected, though she had only seen him from across rooms, from the backs of corridors. His shoulders were tense. His posture was the posture of a man who had learned to take up space as a form of warning. The door closed behind her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, what is your name? His voice was lower than she expected. His Korean she had learned enough by now to know, not the careful, formal Korean of people who spoke to employees. It was direct. Stripped down to function. Adise Collins, she said. Addie. A pause. You are dancing with my son. It wasn't a question. She treated it like one anyway. Yes, sir. He doesn't let people touch him. I know. Another pause, longer this time. He still hadn't turned around. She wondered if that was intentional. She decided it probably was. A man like this one, she suspected, was intentional about most things. How? He asked. She thought about it honestly. I didn't try to make him, she said. I was just there, doing something real. And he decided to join. Silence. Then Jae-in turned around. She had seen him from distances. Up close was different. His face was hard in the way that faces become when they have been decided, when a person has made so many choices about who they are going to be that the decision has settled into their skin permanently. There were shadows under his eyes that had nothing to do with the hour. His expression was not unkind exactly. It was just absent of softness. like softness, was a language he had forgotten how to speak. He looked at her for a long moment. "You come from far away," he said. It was not an insult. It was an observation, almost curious. "Yes," she said. "Why are you still here?" She blinked. I work here, sir." "No." Something shifted slightly in his expression. "I mean in Korea. Why are you still here?" She opened her mouth, closed it, considered answering lightly, and decided not to. "Because sometimes," she said carefully, "the place you stay in isn't the place you plan to stay. It's just the place that needed you." He stared at her. She held his gaze. Not defiantly, not submissively, just steadily, the way her mother had always told her to hold difficult things. "You will continue to cook," he said. "But from now on, Gio eats with the household. Not alone in the kitchen." She nodded, and he stopped. She watched something move across his face, a quick, internal thing that was gone almost as soon as it appeared. "If he comes to you, don't send him away." "I wouldn't," she said simply. He turned back to the window. She understood that she was dismissed. She walked to the door. Her hand was on the handle when his voice came from behind her. "Addie." She stopped. "What was the song?" he asked. "The one you were humming." She didn't turn around. Something told her that whatever this moment was fragile, unexpected, it might not survive being looked at directly. "It doesn't have a name," she said. "My mother made it up. It just means everything is going to be all right." She heard nothing behind her. Then, very quietly, so quietly she almost convinced herself she imagined it. She opened the door and walked out. That evening, Gio ate at the table for the first time in 4 months. He sat at the far end, with his back slightly to the wall the way he preferred, and he ate the rice and the soft braised vegetables Addie had prepared, and he didn't speak, and nobody made him. Jayan sat at the other end of the table. He didn't eat much. He kept looking at his son. At one point, Gio looked up, not at his father, but at the kitchen door. Searching. Addie was watching through the small window in the door. She raised one hand. Just a small wave. Gio went back to eating. Jayan, who had caught the direction of his son's glance, turned to look at the kitchen door a half-second too late. But he looked. The trouble began the next morning. Not with Jayan. Not with Gio. It began with a car that parked outside the estate gates at 7 a.m. and didn't leave. A black vehicle with no plates that Mrs. Song noticed when she went to check the mail and mentioned to Officer Wu, who mentioned it to the head of security, Mr. Park, who chose not to mention it to Jayan because he assumed it was nothing. It was not nothing. Addie didn't know about the car. She was in the kitchen making a breakfast she had learned Gio accepted. Plain rice porridge with a small amount of sesame oil, never too hot, never with the spoon already in the bowl, because for some reason that upset him. She had figured this out by paying attention, which was what she did. Gio appeared in the kitchen doorway at 7:15. "Good morning," she said without turning around. She always said it without turning around because she had noticed he was more comfortable arriving when no one was looking directly at him. He didn't answer. He never answered. But he walked in and took his spot on the low stool near the counter, not at the table, on the stool, and she knew he was ready. She placed the bowl on the counter beside him. Steam rising, sesame oil in exactly the right amount, spoon on the side. He looked at it. Then, without prompting, he said, "More." She turned around. Gio was looking at the bowl. His face was the same as always, quiet, internal, a world operating behind glass. But his mouth had formed the word. Clearly. Deliberately. It was the first word Addie had ever heard him say. She turned back to the stove before he could see her face, because her face was doing something that she didn't want to explain. "One moment," she said, very calmly. She made more. What she didn't know was that Jayan was standing in the hallway. He had come downstairs earlier than usual. He did this sometimes when his thoughts were too loud for his private rooms. He walked the house in the early morning like it was a way of keeping it. He had stopped just outside the kitchen door when he heard Addie's voice inside, and something in him, old habit, the instinct of a man who had survived by watching and waiting, had kept him still. He heard his son's voice say one word. More. Jayan put his hand flat against the wall. He stood there for a very long time. Then he walked away before either of them could know he had been there, and he went to his study, and he sat down, and he looked at his hands, the hands that had built an empire and broken people and signed documents that changed lives, and he thought about a word his son had not spoken in 4 months. More. When Officer Wu knocked on the study door at 8 a.m. to report that the car outside the gate was still there and that intelligence suggested it was connected to a rival organization testing the perimeter, Jae-in looked up with eyes that were, Officer Wu would later describe to his wife, different. Not weaker. Just awake in a new way. Handle it, Jae-in said. Yes, sir. And the cook. Jae-in's eyes sharpened. What about her? Nothing, sir. There's been a message from the organization. Apparently someone at the agency she came through has been asking questions about this estate. A pause. Heavy and specific. What kind of questions? Jae-in said. The kind, Officer Wu said carefully, that people ask when they want to find a way inside. The room was very quiet. Lock down the gate, Jae-in said, and find out everything about Adise Collins. His voice was flat, controlled, professional, but his hand, resting on the desk, the same hand that had pressed against the wall outside the kitchen, curled slowly inward. Jae-in had built his empire on one rule: trust no one until you have read every page of their life. So that night, while Addie slept in the small staff room on the east side of the estate, 3 of his best investigators were already pulling apart every thread of her existence: her school records, her travel documents, her family background, the cooking apprenticeship that ended, the scholarship that never began, the agency that placed her here. By morning, they had a file. Jae-in read it at his desk before the sun was fully up. Adise Collins. Born in a city in West Africa that sat close enough to the ocean that she had written about it once in a school essay. The sea sounds like it's trying to tell you something important, but you have to be patient to hear it. 3rd of 5 children. Father, a schoolteacher who died when she was 11. Mother, a woman named Grace Collins who ran the bakery above which they lived and who, according to a neighbor interviewed by the agency during the original background check, would give you her last bread and then apologize for not having more. The scholarship real. Cancelled due to funding cuts, not her fault. The apprenticeship real. Ended when the restaurant closed 3 months in. The remaining months in Korea, a series of small cooking jobs, a cafe, a catering company, a private family, all of whom described her with the same word in their references. Every single one of them used it. Trustworthy. Jae-in set the file down. Then he picked up the second report, the one his security team had compiled separately, not about Addie herself, but about the agency that had sent her here. This one was different. The agency had been infiltrated 8 months ago by a mid-level operative working for a man named Director O, a figure in the criminal underworld who had been, for the past 2 years, systematically mapping the private lives of people connected to Jae-in's organization. Not to attack. Not yet. To watch. To find pressure points. The question was, had Addie been placed deliberately as a spy? Or had she simply been an ordinary applicant who arrived at an agency that was already compromised? The file did not answer this. Jae-in stared at the wall for a long time. Then he called for Mrs. Song. I need you to watch her, he told the housekeeper. Mrs. Song, who had been with this household long enough to have watched many things she wished she hadn't, kept her face neutral. For how long? Until I know. Mrs. Song nodded slowly. And if she's done nothing wrong? Jae-in picked up the file again. Then I'll know that too. After Mrs. Song left, he sat alone and thought about a woman humming a song with no name in a garden. He thought about his son taking her hand. He thought about the word more spoken in a kitchen that had been silent for 4 months. He thought, I hope she's clean. It was the first time in years he had hoped for something on behalf of someone else. Addie noticed the change immediately. Not because anything was dramatic about it. There were no obvious signs, no one following her with suspicious eyes, no uncomfortable confrontations. It was subtler than that. A slight shift in the air. Mrs. Song appearing in rooms she didn't usually appear in. Questions worked into ordinary conversation. Where did you learn to cook egusi soup? And do you write letters home often? That felt a little too casual to be casual. Addie had grown up with 4 brothers. She knew when she was being tested.
She didn't panic.
She didn't change her behavior. She cooked what she cooked. She went where she went. She talked to Gio the same way she always had, which was sideways, gently, the way you talk to someone who is deciding whether to trust you and you don't want to rush the decision. What she did do, on the third day of feeling watched, was go to the garden alone at dusk and sit on the low stone bench near the rosemary plants and talk to her mother in her head the way she had been doing since she was 11 years old. "They think I might be dangerous," she said silently. Can you imagine? She could almost hear her mother laugh. A big laugh, the kind that took up space. "You?" Her mother's voice said in her memory. "Dangerous. Addie, you once cried because you accidentally stepped on a snail." She smiled at the rosemary. "You do that a lot."
She turned.
Jayan was standing at the garden entrance, not where he usually stood when he occasionally walked the perimeter in the evenings, but closer, 10 feet away, as though he had been approaching and stopped himself. "Do what?" she asked. "Smile at things that don't know you're smiling at them." He paused. "Plants." Gio when his back is turned. "The window when the light is a certain way." She stared at him. "You watch me a lot for someone who hired me to cook." It came out before she could decide if it was wise. His expression did something small and fast. Not quite surprise. Something adjacent to it. "You're direct," he said. "My mother says being indirect is just being confusing on purpose." She turned back to the rosemary. "I'm not trying to confuse anyone." He was quiet for a moment. She heard him take 2 steps closer, then stop. "I need to ask you something," he said. "You've been asking me things for 3 days," she said. "Through Mrs. Song. You can just ask me yourself." The silence that followed was, she could feel it even with her back to him. The silence of a man recalibrating. "The agency that placed you here," he said. "Did anyone there ask you about this estate before you arrived?" She turned around to look at him properly. "Ask me what kind of things?" "The layout. The security. Who lives here?" She thought about it honestly because honesty was the only gear she had. "The woman at the agency asked what kind of household I preferred. Size, number of residents, that sort of thing. I said quiet. She matched me here."
She paused.
"Why?" "The agency has been compromised," he said, "by people who want information about my organization." She absorbed this. "And you thought they might have sent me on purpose?" "I considered it." "Did you decide?" His eyes, those dark, difficult eyes, moved over her face with the same attention she gave to ingredients she was trying to understand. Careful, thorough, looking for what was real. "I'm still deciding," he said. She nodded slowly. "That's fair," she said. "I'd rather you take your time and get it right than rush and get it wrong." He stared at her. "You're not afraid of me." "I'm afraid of lots of things," she said. "Failure. Letting people down. Running out of time with the people I love." She looked at him steadily. "You're not on that list." He was quiet for such a long time that the garden seemed to hold its breath with him. "Go inside," he said finally. "It's getting cold." She stood, brushed the back of her skirt, and walked toward the estate door. She paused at the threshold. "Mr. Seo," she said. He looked at her. "Gio said a word yesterday. He asked for more porridge." She watched his face. "I thought you should know, in case no one told you." She went inside. Jayan stood in the garden alone. The evening came down around him. He didn't move for a long time. The next morning changed everything, and not in the direction anyone expected. Mrs. Song found the note first, slipped under the estate side gate, which should have been impossible given the security measures, which meant whoever left it knew things about the property they had no right to know. She brought it to Jayan without opening it. He read it once. Then he read it again. The note said, "We know about the boy. Back away from the Incheon deal, or the boy's schedule becomes public. You have 48 hours. Jayan set the note on his desk. His face was absolutely still. To someone who didn't know him, he would have looked calm. Officer Wu, who had known him for 7 years, went and stood by the door without being asked, because he had learned that this particular stillness was the kind that preceded something irreversible. "Increase Gioa's security," Jayan said. Quietly. "Don't alarm the household." "Yes, sir." "And find out how that note got through the gate." Yes, sir. And woo, sir. Don't tell the cook. Don't change anything about the kitchen schedule. If whoever left this note is watching the estate, I want the mornings to look exactly the same. Addie did not know about the note. She knew something was different. She could feel the subtle tightening of the atmosphere, the way Officer Wu stood in slightly different positions than usual, the way Jaein, who sometimes walked the upper hallway in the evenings, was doing it in the mornings now too, but she didn't know the specific shape of the danger. She cooked. She hummed. She left Gioa's porridge at the right temperature on the counter every morning. And Gio was changing. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was the way spring changes things. So gradually you almost don't notice until one day you look up and the whole world is different. He started appearing in the kitchen earlier. He started staying longer. And this was the one that made Addie have to face away from him and take a breath, pointing at things. A window. A pot. Her hands working with dough. Pointing was communication. Pointing was I want you to see what I see. Pointing was connection. On the 5th morning after the note, though Addie still didn't know about the note, Gio pointed at the small speaker on the kitchen shelf that Addie sometimes used to play music quietly while she worked. You want music? She asked. He pointed again. She turned it on. A soft melody filled the kitchen. Nothing specific, just a gentle, drifting sound. Gio closed his eyes. And then, softly, barely audible, more felt than heard, he began to hum. Not a song she knew. His own sound. A small, private melody that seemed to come from a place inside him that had been waiting for permission to exist. Addie kept working. She did not say anything. She did not draw attention to it. She just let the sound be there, alongside the music, alongside the morning, as though it had always had a right to exist in this kitchen. When Jaein walked past the kitchen door, which he did now, every morning, as part of his security check, he stopped. He listened for 30 seconds. His son was humming. Jaein pressed his back against the wall outside the kitchen door, out of sight, and closed his eyes, and did something he had not done in years. He let himself feel it. That afternoon, he called Addie to his study again. She arrived the same way she always arrived. No performance, no visible nerves, just herself, steady and clear. She sat when he gestured to the chair across from his desk, which he had never offered before. He usually spoke to her standing. I owe you an explanation, he said. She waited. The agency that placed you here is being used by people who work against me. I spent 3 days investigating you. He paused. You're not connected to them. I know, she said simply. I know you know, he said. I'm telling you because he stopped. The sentence seemed to cost him something. Because you deserved to know sooner. And I'm sorry for the surveillance. She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, you were protecting Gio. Yes. Then I understand it. She folded her hands in her lap. Apology accepted. He stared at her like she'd said something in a language he was learning. Just like that? You had a reason. You told me the truth. You apologized. She tilted her head slightly. What else would there be? He leaned back in his chair, a small movement, almost unconscious, like something in his posture was releasing. Most people in this house are afraid to be honest with me. Most people are afraid of power, she said. I'm more afraid of dishonesty. They cause different kinds of damage. A pause. Then, where did that come from? My father. She said it simply, without the weight of grief, just the weight of truth. He was a schoolteacher. He used to say that power could be taken away, but a lie you told stays inside you and takes up room. Jaein was quiet. He sounds, he said carefully, like he was a good man.
He was, she said.
I miss him every day. The study was very still. Outside the window, the garden was bright with afternoon light. Gio was humming this morning, Jaein said.
His voice was lower now.
The professional edge was gone. What was underneath, it was something raw and honest, and she realized with a quiet shock, a little lost. He hasn't made music since his mother left. Addie was careful. How long ago was that? 8 months. A pause. She isn't dead. She simply decided she could not be the person Gio needed her to be, and she left. He said it the way people say things they have rehearsed until the pain inside them is packed down tight. She is a good woman. It was not a cruel choice. It was just an honest one. Addie said nothing for a moment. Then, and Gio doesn't understand why she's gone. He understands more than people think, Jayan said quietly. He just processes the world differently. Not less. Differently. I know, she said. He's one of the most perceptive people I've ever been around. He notices everything. Something moved across Jayan's face. Something she might have called gratitude, except it was deeper than that. More desperate. The therapist said they said his development was he stopped. They used words like limited, like plateau. They said we should adjust expectations. And you believe them? His eyes met hers. I didn't want to.
Don't, she said.
Not unkindly. Not dramatically. Just firmly. He's not limited. He's just looking for the right language. Everyone needs the right language. Jayan looked at her for a long time. Then he said, very quietly, "What's your right language?" She blinked. No one had ever asked her that. Cooking, she said after a moment. And telling the truth.
She paused.
And songs without names. Somewhere in the house, a clock ticked. Neither of them moved. There are people you meet who change the temperature of a room just by being in it. Not because they're loud. Not because they demand attention. Just because something about them is so genuinely, quietly alive that the air around them seems to wake up. Jayan had spent his adult life around people who changed rooms through fear. Through power. Through the weight of what they could take from you. He had forgotten that a room could be changed differently. He started noticing it everywhere. The way the kitchen staff stood straighter when Addie was there, not from intimidation but because she made work feel worth doing well. The way Mrs. Song, who had been professionally warm and personally exhausted for as long as he'd known her, sometimes laughed, a real laugh, surprised out of her, when Addie said something in the hallway. The way the estate, which had been a beautiful, silent, expensive place that felt more like a waiting room than a home, had started to feel, tentatively, improbably, like people actually lived in it. He noticed it. He tried not to let it mean anything. He had very specific reasons for not letting things mean something. He had built his life, after Gioa's mother left, around those reasons. He had become excellent at not feeling, and the excellence had cost him nothing he mourned, because the things he'd felt before hadn't always been worth the damage they'd caused. But then his son hummed. Then his son pointed at things. Then his son, on a Thursday morning 2 weeks after Addie had arrived, walked into the study, which Gio had not entered voluntarily in over a year, and stood in the middle of the room and held up a small piece of folded paper. Jayan stared at him. For me, he said carefully. Gio held the paper out further. Jayan took it, unfolded it. It was a drawing, crayon, this serious kind of crayon work where a child has pressed hard and meant every line. 2 figures in a garden. One tall with straight, dark lines for a suit. One smaller with curly scribbled hair that Jayan understood immediately was meant to be Addie's natural hair, because Gio had stared at it with focused wonder the first time he'd seen it properly. Between the 2 figures, a small third figure. Jayan looked at the drawing for a long moment. Then he looked at his son. Gio was watching him with those dark, careful eyes, waiting, the way he always waited, for the world to respond in a way that made sense. You drew us, Jayan said. Gioa's chin dipped. The smallest possible nod. Together, Jayan said. Another dip. Jayan folded the drawing carefully and put it in the inner pocket of his jacket, against his chest. Thank you, he said. Gio turned and walked out. Jayan sat at his desk for 10 minutes without moving, his hand flat over his chest where the drawing was, and felt something he couldn't describe, a cracking open, like ground that has been frozen for too long finally beginning to give. He found Addie in the kitchen at noon, doing something complicated with plantains that smelled extraordinary. Did you know Gio draws? He asked from the doorway. She glanced over her shoulder. He started last week. I left some crayons on the pantry shelf, not for him specifically, just there. He found them on his own. Jayan was quiet for a moment. He drew us. All three of us. In the garden. Her hand slowed slightly on the cutting board. She didn't turn around. That's good, she said. Her voice was careful in the way voices get when they're trying to hold something fragile. Drawings are his way of saying what he sees. If he drew you, he sees you. Jayan stepped into the kitchen. He never came into the kitchen. The kitchen was staff space. He had maintained that boundary for his 11 years in this estate with total consistency. He sat down on the low stool near the counter. The one Gio used. Addie looked at him. A small, surprised look. Tell me how you do it, he said. Do what? Reach him. The words came out without their professional coding. Just the words, plain and needing an answer. I have tried for 2 years. I have hired the best specialists. I have read everything. And in 3 weeks he stopped. She turned fully to face him. Her expression wasn't pitying. He would have hated pity. It was something more honest. You love him the right amount, she said. That's obvious. You love him completely. But I think, she hesitated. I think sometimes when we love someone and we're scared for them, our love starts to look like solving, like fixing, like trying to find the right technique.
She paused.
Gio doesn't need a technique. He needs someone who's just comfortable being with him, not working on him, just with him. Jayan was very still. You make it sound simple, he said. It isn't simple, she said. Being patient without expectation is one of the hardest things there is. I have to work at it every day. She turned back to the plantains. You could do it too. You just haven't been taught how. Who taught you? My mother. She sliced a plantain with clean, practiced efficiency. She had 5 children and a bakery and not enough money and more love than the house could contain. She didn't have time for techniques. She just showed up and stayed. He watched her work. The rhythm of her hands. The ease of her in this space. Like the kitchen was a place she'd always owned, not because she'd fought for it, but because she belonged in it. Tell me about her, he said. Your mother. She glanced at him. You want to hear about my mother? I'm asking, aren't I? She considered him for a moment. Then she began to talk. She talked while she cooked, and he listened from the stool, and the kitchen smelled of plantains and something warm and sweet, and outside the window the afternoon moved through its colors, and somewhere in the estate Gio was in his room, making more drawings that nobody had asked him to make. Grace Collins, Addie told him, was a woman who woke up every morning at 4 to have the first bread ready by 6. She knew all her customers by name and by what was happening in their lives. She had once kept a family fed for 3 months on credit because the father lost his job and had never once mentioned the debt in public and had written it off privately when she knew they were struggling. She had raised 5 children on the principle that the world was not always kind, but kindness itself was always available, and it cost you nothing you couldn't afford. She sounds like someone the world isn't careful enough with, Jayan said. Addie looked at him. Something in her expression shifted, a surprised softness, like she hadn't expected that from him. Yes, she said quietly. Exactly like that. He met her eyes. Then, and this was the thing that changed the temperature of the afternoon entirely, he said, my mother died when I was 9. I don't remember her voice anymore. I try to sometimes. I remember the shape of her, the color of her coat. But the voice, he stopped, pressed his thumb to the side of his index finger, a small, controlled gesture. It's gone. The kitchen was quiet. I'm sorry, Addie said. Simple.
Real.
No performance. I've never told anyone that, he said. Not accusing. Just honest in a way that seemed to surprise him as he said it. Some things are easier to say in a kitchen, she offered. A pause. Then the smallest thing, the ghost of something that might have been the beginning of a smile. There and gone. Perhaps, he said. It was Mrs. Song who noticed first. She had spent 11 years reading this house the way other people read weather. Watching small signs, drawing accurate conclusions. She noticed that the master was in the kitchen at noon. She noticed that the kitchen conversation lasted 40 minutes. She noticed that when he walked back to his study, his posture was slightly different from his usual posture, as though something he'd been carrying had been, not removed, but shifted to a less painful position. She went to find Officer Wu. We have a situation, she said. Officer Wu looked up from his security reports. The note? The gate breach?
No.
She folded her hands. A different kind of situation. He stared at her. Then, slowly, understanding moved across his face. Oh, he said. Yes, said Mrs. Song. They looked at each other with the shared alarm of two people who have dedicated their professional lives to the well-being of a very complicated man and have just realized that the thing most likely to complicate him further has already begun. The complication arrived officially 3 days later. Not from inside the estate. From outside it. Jae-in received a call from his second-in-command, a precise, humorless man named Director Wu, no relation to Officer Wu, who informed him that Director O's people had identified the cook. What does that mean? Jae-in said. It means they've connected her to you. To your son. They know she matters to the household. A pause. They're going to use her.
How?
We don't know yet. But they're already watching her outside the estate. Yesterday, she went to the market. She was followed. Jae-in set his pen down carefully. Does she know? He asked.
No.
Don't tell her yet. I need to understand the shape of it first. Sir. Director Wu paused. If they're planning to approach her or use her as leverage. I said don't tell her yet. His voice was flat. Definitive. I'll handle it. He ended the call. For a long moment he sat at his desk. Then he opened the drawer and took out the drawing Gio had given him, unfolded it, smoothed it on the desk with his palm. 3 figures in a garden. He looked at it for a very long time. Then he reached into his drawer for a different document, a transfer of employment authorization. He looked at it. Then he closed the drawer. Not yet. But the unease in his chest had taken a new shape, the specific shape of a man who has let something become important and is only now fully understanding what that means. Here is what Addie knew. The market near the estate was a 40-minute walk. She took it every Tuesday and Thursday because the vendor on the east corner had African palm oil that she had not been able to find anywhere else in the region, and she needed it for 3 of Gioa's favorite dishes. Here is what Addie didn't know. The second Tuesday after the note, she was followed from the estate gates by a man in a gray jacket who stopped when she stopped and moved when she moved and took photographs with a phone that looked like it wasn't doing anything. Here is what Addie did know, without being able to explain how she knew it. On that same Tuesday, somewhere between the palm oil vendor and the rice stand, the back of her neck told her that the afternoon had changed. She kept walking. She kept her face ordinary. She bought her palm oil and her rice, and the particular kind of dried mushrooms that Gio had recently decided were acceptable to eat. And then she did something that the man in the gray jacket did not expect. She turned around and walked directly toward him. Not aggressively. Not with any sign that she knew who he was. Just a woman changing her mind about her route and walking back the way she had come. He had to step sideways. She was 3 feet from his face. She saw him clearly. She did not react. She walked past him, back to the estate, and she went into the kitchen and she put away the groceries and she said nothing. But her mind was moving, quickly, carefully, the way her mind moved when something required real attention. Someone was watching her, which meant someone knew she mattered here, which meant the safest thing she could do for Gio, for the household, possibly for herself, was to not matter. She stood at the counter with her hands flat on the surface and breathed slowly. She thought about Gioa's new drawings, about Jaehin's voice when he said it's gone, about the way this kitchen had started to feel less like a workplace and more like something she didn't have a word for yet. She thought about her mother, who would have said, Addie, you know what you need to do. You're just afraid to do it. She was afraid. She took the groceries out of the bag one by one and put them in their places with the careful precision of someone trying to keep their hands steady. When Jaehin walked past the kitchen door that evening, she was still standing there. He looked in. She looked up. And in the single second before either of them arranged their expressions, both of them showed something they hadn't planned to show. She saw that he was afraid too. She looked away first. He walked on. Neither of them slept well that night. This is the moment the story has been building toward. Don't let anyone tell you what happens next before you watch this to the end. Subscribe now and stay with the story, because what Gio does next is something no one in the house will ever forget. The next morning, Addie made a decision. She woke at 5, earlier than usual, and she sat on the edge of her bed in the small staff room, and she thought through what she knew. Someone was watching her. The estate had enemies she didn't fully understand. She had become, without intending to, without asking for it, something that mattered to people she had not planned to matter to. A boy who had stopped speaking. A man who had stopped feeling. And herself, who had come here with nothing but a suitcase and a stubborn heart, and had somehow put down roots in ground that was not hers. If she left, Gio might lose the progress he had made. The humming might stop. The drawings might stop. The morning porridge routine that was not just a routine but a lifeline. If she stayed, she was a risk. A point of pressure that someone dangerous could use. She sat with both of these truths and let them be heavy. Then she got up and made the porridge. Gio came at 7:15 as always. He took his stool. He waited for his bowl. When she set it in front of him, he did something new. He looked up at her. Not at the bowl. Not at the counter. At her face. His eyes were dark and direct, and full of something that in an adult would be called recognition. The kind of recognition that says, I know you. I chose you. You matter. Good morning, Gio, she said. He held her gaze for 3 full seconds, an enormous amount of time for him. Then he looked at his bowl. But he had looked. Addie turned back to the stove. She counted her breaths. At 8 a.m., Jayan came to the kitchen. Not past it this time. Into it. He came in and stood on the side of the counter where the stool was, and he looked at her and he said, I need to tell you something. Joe was still there on his stool, finishing his porridge. Jayan glanced at his son, then back at her. You were followed at the market yesterday, he said. She kept her expression even. I know. He stopped. You know. I saw him. She wiped her hands on her apron. Gray jacket. East side of the market. Jayan stared at her. You didn't say anything. I was deciding what to do about it. She turned to face him properly. I've decided. What have you decided? She looked at him steadily. I'm going to stay, she said. If you'll keep me on. But I wanted you to know that I know, and that I'm choosing to stay knowing it. I'm not someone who needs protecting from the truth. His jaw was set. His eyes were very still. These people, he said. They're dangerous. They're not. This is not a small thing, Addie. I know. You could go home. I would pay for the ticket. I would give you references that. I know, she said again. I'm staying. He looked at her for a long time. Something moved through his expression, something that started as argument and ended as something else. Something he couldn't make himself say out loud in a kitchen at 8 in the morning. Gio put down his spoon. Both of them looked at him. He was looking at his father. Not with confusion, not with the absence of attention that sometimes characterized his gaze. He was looking with specific, pointed, clear intention. Stay, Gio said. One word, addressed to his father. Spoken in a clear, deliberate voice. The kitchen went very quiet. Jayan looked at his son. His face, which had been maintained in professional stillness for so long that it had become second nature, fractured. Just slightly. Just enough. I'm not going anywhere, Jayan said, his voice rougher than usual. I'm not leaving. Gio looked at Addie. Stay, he said again. She nodded. I'm staying, she said. Gio picked his spoon back up and finished his porridge with the calm of someone who has resolved the matter. Jayan didn't go back to his study. He stayed in the kitchen. He sat on the stool that Gio had vacated when he finally went to his room, and he accepted the cup of tea Addie made without asking if he wanted one, and he said nothing for a long time. How do you do that? He said eventually. She was starting on prep for lunch. Do what? Decide. So quickly. Without visible fear. She considered this. I'm afraid, she said. I'm very afraid, actually. But my father used to say that fear is just love looking at the future. She paused. If I'm afraid to lose something, it means I love it. And I'd rather love things and be afraid than not love them and be safe. He was quiet. What do you love? He asked.
She didn't hesitate. Gio.
This kitchen. The market on Tuesdays. The way the light comes in here at 6 in the morning.
A beat.
My mother's voice. My brother's nonsense. The smell of fresh bread. She glanced at him. What do you love? He looked down at his tea.
Gio, he said.
Then, slowly, like someone testing ice to see if it holds. This house. The way it sounds in the early morning. Another pause. Apparently, he stopped. She waited. Apparently, I love the sound of someone humming in a kitchen, he said. Very quietly. Not looking at her. I didn't know that until recently. The morning light lay across the counter between them. Neither of them said anything. But something settled. The way snow settles, quietly, making everything it touches both heavier and lighter at the same time. The crisis came at noon. Not slowly, not with warning. Director Wu called Jaehyun's phone and spoke 4 sentences that changed the shape of the day immediately. Director Oh's people were not waiting anymore. They had escalated. They had a recording, taken from a source inside the household that Jaehyun had not yet identified, of Gio's weekly therapy schedule, his school calendar, his personal routines. And they were threatening to give it to a tabloid that specialized in weaponizing the private lives of powerful men against them. A story about a mafia boss whose autistic son had been failed by every specialist and was only now making progress because of a foreign cook he was keeping on his estate was, in the world of enemies and leverage, an extremely useful story. They want you to pull out of the Incheon deal, Director Wu said. And they want it by tonight. Jaehyun closed his study door. He stood at his window. The Incheon deal was not just business. It was a protective arrangement, a realignment that would cut off 3 of Director Oh's primary income sources. Pulling out of it would not just be surrender. It would be an invitation for more demands. This was how these things worked. He had always known this. He had never blinked at it before. But Gio was in the picture now. Gio's name. Gio's routines. Gio's vulnerability, made public, made spectacular, made into a weapon. He pressed his palm against the window glass. Then he made a decision that surprised even him. He called for Addie. She came to the study, and he told her everything. Not a summary. Not a careful, curated version. Everything, the note, the market surveillance, the recording, the tabloid threat, the deadline. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she sat for a moment with her hands in her lap. What is the Incheon deal? She asked. A business arrangement. What kind? He looked at her. The kind that my world runs on. Is it worth Gio's safety? No, he said immediately. The word came out before he could dress it up. Nothing is worth Gio's safety. She nodded slowly. Then what's the actual problem? If I give in tonight, they'll ask for more tomorrow. Yes, she said. And the problem is not just tonight. It's every night after it. Yes. So I need to find the source inside this household. The person giving them information. He looked at her directly. It isn't you. I know, she said, without defensiveness. I need you to help me find out who it is. She was quiet for a moment. You're asking me to what? Watch people?
Report back. No.
He shook his head. You move through this house differently than I do. People are comfortable around you. They say things. His voice was careful. I'm not asking you to spy. I'm asking you to notice. The way you notice things. The way you notice the man at the market before I could tell you. She looked at him for a long moment. If I help you, she said slowly, and we find the source, what happens to that person? His jaw tightened slightly. That depends on what they've done. I need a better answer than that, she said. If someone in this house made a mistake, was scared or pressured, or didn't understand what they were involved in, that's different from someone who deliberately endangered Gio. The room was very still. He looked at her steadily. You're negotiating with me. I'm telling you my terms, she said. The same way I'd want anyone to tell me theirs. Something moved in his expression. Not anger. The opposite of anger, actually a kind of arrested respect. Fine, he said. If someone was coerced, I'll handle it with proportionality. And if someone endangered Gio knowingly? His eyes were very dark. Then I'll handle it without you in the room.
She accepted this.
Okay, she said. Okay. He searched her face. You're not a simple person, she said. I know that. I'm not asking you to pretend your world is simple. I'm asking for your word that Geo stays safe and that people who didn't mean harm don't get destroyed for it. She held his gaze. That's enough. He gave her his word. And that word, she decided, meant something because it was the only kind of currency she could see this man had never spent carelessly. She found the source by the end of the afternoon. It wasn't who anyone expected. It was the second housekeeper, a young woman named Ms. On who had been with the estate for 14 months and who had a younger brother with significant medical debt and a phone number in her contacts list that matched a number on Director Wu's intelligence report. Addie had noticed two things. Ms. On had been in the therapy scheduling area of the house twice last week on days she had no reason to be there. And Ms. On, who always ate lunch with the rest of the staff, had eaten alone for the past 6 days. Alone was the tell. Guilt is heavy. People who are carrying it don't sit in groups. She told Jae-in. He called Ms. On to his study. The conversation lasted 11 minutes. Addie waited in the kitchen and made the most complex dish she knew, a slow-cooked, multi-layered thing that required complete attention because she needed her hands to be doing something real. When Jae-in came to the kitchen door afterward, she looked at his face. She was coerced, he said. Her brother's debt. Is she staying? A pause. She's being reassigned, not dismissed.
He paused again.
I'm paying the brother's debt. Addie went very still.
You didn't have to do that, she said.
I know, he said. But someone in your presence long enough apparently starts making decisions based on what's proportional rather than what's efficient. He said it without humor. He said it like a fact, like something he was observing about himself with genuine surprise. She turned back to her stove. Jae-in, she said his name, without the title, for the first time. She felt rather than saw him go still at the sound of it. Geo is going to be okay. The kitchen was quiet. I know, he said. His voice was different. Lower. Stripped of every professional layer it usually had. Because of you. Because of him, she said firmly. I just showed up. He did the work. Both. Jae-in said. Both of you. She didn't answer. But she was smiling at the stove, facing away from him. In the private way she smiled at things that didn't know she was smiling at them. And this time he was close enough to see it. There is a specific moment. You can't plan for it, can't schedule it, can't make it happen through cleverness or will. When something you've been building without knowing you were building it becomes real enough to touch. For Jae-in, that moment came on a Sunday. He had been walking the upper hallway at 6 in the morning, a habit now no longer about security, or at least not entirely about security, when he heard it. Two voices. Both of them in the kitchen.
He stopped.
Gioa's voice was doing something it had never done in the entire 8 years of his life that Jae-in had been a witness to. It was talking. Not one word. Not a repeated request. Talking, a stream of sound that was as Jae-in slowly and carefully approached the kitchen doorway. Actually language. Actual sentences, some of them broken, some of them circling back on themselves, but sentences nonetheless. About the drawing he had done yesterday, the one with the 3 figures on a bridge. About the color blue, and why it was his preferred color. About the sound that rain made on the kitchen window, which he had decided was similar to the sound of the rice crackers Mrs. Song kept in the 3rd cabinet. And Addie was answering. Not effusively, not with the overwhelming positive reinforcement that therapists sometimes used, and that Geo had always seemed to find uncomfortable. Just answering. Like it was normal. Like his son talking was simply a thing that happened and she was glad of it and she would engage with it the same way she engaged with everything. The bridge in the drawing, she was saying. Is that a real bridge or one you made up? Geo considered. Made, he said. Then, but I want it real. Where would it go? A pause. Here. A pause. To there. Here to where? To the place where he stopped. Reconsidered. To the place where you are. Jae-in put one hand against the doorframe. I'm right here, Addie said gently. Yes. And in Gioa's voice there was something that 8 years of therapists and specialists and doctors and expensive programs had tried to unlock and failed, something simple and clear and whole. Yes. I know. Jae-in stepped back from the doorway. He went to his study. He sat down. He thought about the drawing in his inner pocket, the 3 figures in the garden. He took it out and placed it on the desk and looked at it in the early morning light. Then he thought about what he was going to do. Underscore 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 underscore. He was going to let himself have this. It was not a simple decision. It did not arrive without cost. He knew, with the precision of a man who had spent decades calculating risk, exactly what it would mean. He was a complicated man in a complicated world. The kind of world that pressed on people who got close to him. He had spent the last 2 years since Gioa's mother left constructing the belief that closeness was an expense he could no longer afford. But Gio had a bridge drawing. Gio had sentences. Gio had a voice again, thin and new and extraordinary, like the first green thing that comes up after a long winter. And Jayan had, for the first time since he was a 9-year-old boy losing the sound of his mother's voice, someone who cooked his son warm porridge in the morning and hummed songs without names and told him the truth even when the truth was inconvenient. He was going to let himself have this. Not impulsively. Not with the desperate grasp of a man who had been starving.
Carefully.
Honestly. On her terms, which were better than his. Underscore. He found her in the garden at dusk. She was on the stone bench, turned slightly toward the rosemary, in the particular posture that meant she was thinking. He sat down on the other end of the bench, not close, not so far away that the distance itself became a statement. Just present. She didn't look up immediately. She gave him a moment, the way she gave Gio moments, and he felt, not for the first time, seen by that. "You heard us this morning," she said. Not a question. Yes. And he stopped. Began again. "And I wanted you to know that what you have done for my son is," he stopped again. The sentence was too large for the usual containers. He was not a man who had practiced with sentences like this one. "You don't have to make it formal," she said quietly. "I'm not being formal." He turned to look at her. I'm trying to be."
"Real," she said.
"Yes." She was looking at him now. Her expression was open in the way her expressions always were. Nothing hidden, nothing performed. Just her. Addie. His voice was low and careful and completely without the armor he usually wore. "I need to tell you something, and I want to say it correctly, which means I need you to not interrupt me until I'm finished, because I may lose my courage partway through." She tilted her head slightly. "Okay. I have been very good for a very long time, and not needing people." He looked at his hands. "I was taught, by my life, that needing people was a structural weakness. That the only safe thing was to stand alone, and to do it well." He paused. "And I did. I stood alone and I did it very well, and the cost of it was this house."
It was a child who stopped speaking.
It was a man who couldn't remember what it felt like to mean something to another person and not be afraid of it. The garden was very still. "And then you came here," he said, "with your suitcase, and your stubborn heart, and your song without a name." He looked up at her. His eyes were direct. Open. More open than she had ever seen them. "And I'm not going to tell you that you fix me because I think that would insult both of us, and also because I don't think I'm fixed. I think he searched for the word. Beginning. I think I'm beginning." She was watching him with the kind of attention that felt, to its subject, like being properly seen for the first time. "Jayan," she said. "I'm not finished," he said. "I know." She smiled. "I was just practicing saying your name. I've been thinking about it all day." He stared at her. Then, quietly, slowly, like a door that has been closed for years opening on its first try, he smiled. A real smile. Not the ghost of one. Not the controlled, almost expression he sometimes wore. A smile that reached his eyes and changed his face and made him look, for a moment, like the person he might have been if his life had been gentler. "You are the most unusual person I have ever met," he said. "Good," she said. "Usual is forgettable." He looked at her for a long time. I want this to be something real, he said. You and Gio and this house, and he paused. Whatever this is between us, I want it to be real. I want to do it honestly, without rushing it, without my world making it into something it isn't. He met her eyes. Is that something you want too? She was quiet for a moment. Not uncertain, thinking. Being thorough the way she was thorough about everything.
Jae-in, she said.
I came here with a suitcase and a scholarship that didn't work out and a cooking job and nothing else. I stayed because the city asked me to be patient. I took this job because it was available and the pay was fair. She paused. And then Gio sat under the kitchen table with a spoon against his cheek, and I made him soup and she stopped. Laughed softly. A quiet, wondering laugh. And I think that was the moment. I think I knew then that something was going to happen here. I didn't know what. I didn't know it would be you. She looked at him. But yes, it's what I want. The evening settled around them. Lights were coming on in the estate. Warm yellow lights in windows, the kind that from outside look like the whole idea of home made visible. There's something I need to do, Jae-in said. Before this goes any further. She waited. I'm going to reduce my involvement in the organization, he said. Not overnight. Not recklessly. But Gio deserves a different kind of house. And so do you. He said the last part quietly, as though checking that he was allowed to say it. She looked at him carefully. That's a very large thing. Yes. Is it because of me? It's because of Gio, he said. But yes. Also because of you. Because you told me once that if you're afraid to lose something, it means you love it. He held her gaze. I'm afraid of losing this. Both of you. He paused. I would rather change who I am than lose what I'm becoming. The silence that followed was not an empty silence. It was full of everything that had happened in this house in the past 3 weeks. Every bowl of porridge. Every word Gio had added to his vocabulary. Every conversation in the kitchen. Every time Jae-in had walked past the door just to hear the sound inside it. Okay, she said. Okay, he said, the same way he'd said it in his study, that same slight disbelief. You keep expecting me to make things harder than they are, she said. Most things are hard. Some things, she said simply, are just true. And true things don't need to be complicated. He looked at her. You are, he said slowly, the most honest person I have ever met. My father's daughter, she said. 3 days after that conversation in the garden, 3 days during which the house was different in ways that Mrs. Song noted and Officer Wu acknowledged and Gio demonstrated by producing a new drawing. 2 figures on a bench, one with curly scribbled hair and one tall, the 2 of them sitting a precise and particular distance apart that was neither too close nor too far. The situation with Director O resolved itself in a way no one expected. Director O, it turned out, had his own pressure points. Director Wu, the professional, humorless one, had spent the past 2 weeks compiling information about Director O's own private arrangements. Not to harm him, to balance the scales. And when Jae-in sat across from Director O's representative and laid out, calmly and without drama, the things he knew, the Incheon deal moved forward unmolested. The threat to Gio evaporated. Not because it was solved with force. Because it was solved with information. With patience. With a particular clarity that comes when a man has decided what he values and is no longer pretending otherwise. But here's the part of the story that nobody in the estate was ready for. On the Thursday after the threat was resolved, a bright, cold morning with a kind of sky that looks like it's been washed, Gio came into the kitchen at 7:15 as usual. He took his stool. He waited for his porridge. And when Addie placed the bowl in front of him, he looked up at her. And he said not one word, not two, not a fragment, a full sentence. His first full sentence in months. You smell like my mom's garden used to smell, he said. Before she went away. Addie went completely still. She turned to face him fully, with her whole self, without trying to hide what his words had done to her. Tell me about that garden, she said. Gio looked at his bowl. Flowers, he said. She had ones that were orange. She said orange was the bravest color. A pause. I think you're the bravest color. The kitchen was entirely silent. In the doorway, because he had been walking the hallway at 7:15 every morning for 2 weeks now, not for security, but for these few minutes of sound leaking under the door. Jaein stood. He heard his son tell a woman she was the bravest color. He stood in the hallway, and he pressed his hand against the wall, and he did not try to stop what was happening inside his chest. It was happening. It was real. It was his son talking. His son comparing. His son reaching across the great and private distance that the world had always assumed was unbridgeable towards someone who had simply shown up and stayed. After a long moment, Jaein walked to the kitchen door and pushed it open. Gio looked at his father. Jaein looked at his son. Then Jaein sat down on the floor of the kitchen. Not the stool, the floor. Right there, on the kitchen floor, next to his son's stool. Gio stared at him. Your mother's orange flowers, Jaein said slowly. I remember those too. Gio's face did something complicated and quiet and entirely his own. Then he held out his spoon. Jaein looked at the spoon for a moment. Then he took it. He helped his son eat the rest of the porridge. And Addie, standing at the stove with her back to both of them, let the tears come down her face in complete silence so that neither of them could see. She was smiling too. 6 months later, the kitchen in the CO estate still smelled of whatever Addie was making. Gio still came at 7:15, but now he brought his drawings with him, and sometimes he narrated them. A running description of colors and bridges and imaginary places that he delivered in his own particular rhythm, which was not like other people's rhythms and was entirely right for being his. Jaein came to the kitchen every morning.
Not secretly now.
He sat at the table, the actual table, not the stool, because the stool was Gio's, and drank his tea, and sometimes talked, and sometimes just was present, which Addie had told him was enough. Which it was. The organization was changing. Not gone. These things do not disappear overnight, and Jaein was not a man who made promises without foundations. But it was changing.
Gradually.
With intention. Mrs. Song had stopped worrying. Officer Wood started smiling more, which unsettled everyone slightly, but was ultimately welcome. And Addie had called her mother. A long call on a Saturday evening in the garden near the rosemary. She had told her mother everything. The suitcase, the scholarship, the estate,
the boy,
the man. Her mother had listened to all of it. Then she said, Addie, you always went where you were needed. You just didn't always know it until after. Addie looked at the lights of the estate, warm yellow lights in windows, the whole idea of home made visible. I know it now, she said. Her mother was quiet for a moment. Then, and Addie could hear the smile in it, the big laugh waiting just behind it, she said, and this man, is he worth your stubborn heart? Addie looked through the kitchen window at the man inside, who was sitting at the table showing his son something in a book, pointing at a page, and then at Gio, and then at the book again, patient and present in the particular new way of someone learning, day by day, how to stay. Yes, she said. I think he is. Her mother hummed, something without words, something that meant you're safe, you're home. Everything is going to be all right. Addie hummed it back. And in the kitchen, through the window, Gio looked up from his book and toward the garden, toward the sound coming from outside, and he tilted his head exactly the way he always tilted it when he was listening but didn't want you to know. But this time, slowly he smiled. What happens between Addie and Jaein in the final part is not what either of them planned, and it is not what you are expecting either. Subscribe now so that the next part reaches you the moment it arrives, because this ending is not one to stumble on late. Stories that change something inside you deserve to be watched from the very beginning to the very last word. See you in my next one.